So as a professional services organization, the expectation is that companies, you should be growing year after year. That's great if you can attain it. Trying to manage that growth is the hardest part. A lot of times I'm talking with individuals or companies where the growth is actually faster than they're expecting and they're just trying to keep up. Other organizations, they're starting to slow down, so how can they boost that growth factor? So really the objective as an organization is to grow by X percent year over year. And of course you want to define that X percent, something that can be attainable, sort of that may be aggressive, but that you have some kind of plans in place to attain it. So how do you know what you can actually attain? I always like to start off with looking at current measures. This builds on what we talked about last month as far as different metrics. So what's your capacity? What's your target capacity? I'm defining these separately because capacity is if everyone worked 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, you could theoretically make X number of dollars, but realistically there's the whole man month or person month type metric and target utilization and holidays and stuff. So really there's a target capacity that realistically you should be able to hit if everyone achieves a standard target utilization, for example, like 75% billable utilization. So that's sort of the hours that you have available based on the staff that you have right now. Capacity, I'm talking in terms of hours. You can also talk in terms of dollars. If you apply like a trending measure like your bill rate, what's your average bill rate? What's the target bill rate that you're trying to get to as a company? And those sort of work together because the average bill rate may be something that it spikes at times of the year, or it's on a trending up cycle because you're selling more expensive services and having a higher bill rate. So perhaps your target bill rate will be higher than your average bill rate going forward. If it's trending down, maybe you're doing a lot of fixed price work. You're trying to figure out where that estimation needs to be shored up a little bit. So you don't want your target bill rate to be too low, but picking something realistic that you see that you're getting from a trending perspective, matching the capacity hours with that bill rate, just doing the math, you get money targets that you can hit as a company. So then you take that as a plan and you sort of compare it to a predictive measure. So how are you forecasting? Forecasting is an art. It's definitely, you can try to make it as scientific as possible, but you're still sort of making assumptions and taking best guess on what's going to happen in the future. So there's the backlog forecast and the pipeline forecast. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but where do you think the business is coming in? Where do you think your resources are going to be working? And being able to compare against those, the capacity and the bill rate to see if you're going to be able to make your plan for the year. And of course, to factor on top of that is typically if you're growing the organization, you're growing it through the potential of adding more offerings, adding more resources to your team, because as we've talked about in the past, professional services organizations, their primary asset is people. And if you want to grow the organization, that tends to drive you needing to hire people to be able to perform more services, to be able to bring in more revenue as a company. Okay. So I thought I would throw a metric out there that was announced as part of the press releases that SPI Research put out. And this maturity model benchmark report is available from spiresearch.org. I have the web link a little bit later. This professional services maturity showed that on average, for all the people that participated in the benchmark study, the average growth in 2015 of a services organization was just slightly under 10%. So, and then they come out with their best of the best. So we got recognized by them, which I'm very happy about. But really, the 10% would be if that's the average growth, then maybe you want to shoot for that being your target or your growth percentage year after year, or you want to pick something a little bit higher, make it a little bit more aggressive. But of course, you have to come up with a plan on how to manage that growth. So here's my example of sort of establishing a plan. As a company, you want to establish the plan that you want to measure yourself against so that you have some kind of forward-looking measure of, do I need to adjust what I'm doing as a company? What do I need to change to be able to bring in more revenue? And it's not just, let's see how much money I can make every month. You really want to set that plan so that you can take corrective actions and accommodate things that just happen in normal life, as part of the plan so that you understand whether you're going to be able to hit targets or not by the end of the year. So I like to start with computing an attainable earnings based on the current staff. So based on the headcount that you have, and it's typically billable headcount, because those are the folks that are doing the services delivery, you figure out their capacity. And the capacity can be as simple as taking all the working hours in a year and multiplying it by the number of billable staff. Now, is that realistic capacity? No, because that assumes nobody takes holidays off, nobody takes breaks, vacations, things like that. They don't get sick. So that's sort of an upper limit capacity if you want to think of it like that. So how many hours could you possibly deliver if everyone that was billable full-time for the year, and that's the number of hours and a capacity in hours that you could deliver as a services organization. But then you want to apply that reasonable logic to it. So what's really the target that you're asking everyone? And this can be something that could be a target by skill set or by individual person, role in the company, things like that. What's the target that you're expecting those individuals to hit? And that's your more realistic billable hours number that you can attain times the number of staff. So capacity and target capacity sort of gives you that little bit of a bracket. What you should be hitting if you want to hit your numbers all together is the target. What's your upper echelon is the full capacity. And if you are forecasting or trending somewhere in between those, then you're on the great path. You're on the great path for hitting that revenue plan and growing that year after year. You also want to get that average bill rate because the hours are important, but unless you know what the price of those hours are, what the earnings of those hours are, it won't be as effective if you have like tons of people doing hours and you find out you're pricing them at $10 an hour because the fixed fee projects are losing money. So we want to be able to get that average bill rate. And in theory, the average bill rate, even though it's a bill rate, I like to use revenue because revenue is really your earnings, and revenue tends to depending on your revenue policies, they tend to be more aligned to the delivery time frame of a project versus like an upfront prepaid situation where you're invoicing everything up front, but you're earning it throughout the life of the project. That sort of flattens things out a little bit more so the trending works out better. So I like to use revenue divided by worked hours. Now, there's a little bit of a numbers game here that you can think about is it really all the worked hours against the project, or is it only the billable hours? Because any of you who've worked on projects before know that this can be a very different number. I like to use all the worked hours. I like to throw the non-billable hours in there on projects because it gives me that the effort that needs to be delivered to the project and what the bill rate ends up being based on maybe some customer sat issues, maybe some work redone, maybe some shadowing that I'm picking up. That way I know the hours that I'm getting from my team, and I know what the average bill rate would be with all those different things factored in. And then obviously in order for me to increase the bill rate, I need to focus on how to reduce the non-billable hours on projects and be able to make sure that we're doing more efficient delivery of services. So I get that average bill rate and I multiply it through for the capacity and the target capacity, and then you figure out your plan. Now, the thing about average bill rate, if I measured it today, it's one number. If I measure it 3 months from now, it could be a different number. So I like to think in terms of trending for the bill rate, because the trending bill rate, if it's continually decreasing, I want to understand why it's decreasing. Are we giving hours away? Are we having trouble on delivery? Are we overstaffing projects? Are we underpricing things that are turning out to be fixed fee and we're sort of not recovering cost perspective? If it's increasing, why is it increasing? Are we being more efficient on our fixed fee projects? Is the bill rate going higher? The sales team out there showing the value add and getting us larger bill rates? All of those bill rate trends give me a realistic, what should I pick for my average bill rate to come up with this math? Because the next step of the math is really figuring out what's your revenue target for the year. So, like for example, if I use a 20/80 year, which like I said is fairly unrealistic because you expected everyone to work every hour of every day on a 40-hour work week, and I had 10 billable staff, then I would expect my capacity to be about 20,000 hours. But from a target perspective, let's say I ask all of my billable staff to be at a 75% target, meaning they're going to make 75% of the time that they spend doing work billable work. So that turns out to be a little bit more reasonable. It's 15,000 hours. So I've got a range here that I can work with for my plan. And let's say the average bill rate that I'm trying to shoot for is $200 an hour. And if you look at the trends, what I would suggest is if it's trending down, obviously there's probably corrective action that you want to take to find out why the trend is going down. So I would stick with the average bill rate that you may have used in a previous year and sort of address the fact that the trend is going down for bill rate in another showcase, try to understand why that is and to bring it back up. If it's trending up, though, I wouldn't sort of shoot for the moon and pick a bill rate that, oh, I think we're going to average, $250 an hour in this year, because that's a huge jump. But if you wanted to sort of increase your bill rate by like a 5 or 10%, especially if you're expecting to grow by 10%, then that would be something that you could probably attain or be a little bit more realistic. So you could increase the average bill rate a little bit as you work out establishing your plan. So if I say, okay, I'm going to stick with the 200 average bill rate, I'm going to use my target capacity because that's my lower echelon. Realistically, if everyone hits their targets, I should be able to make $3.12 million as an organization, $200 times all the hours. Okay. So that's my plan, but then what you want to do is you want to factor in that growth factor, right? So you want to factor in the fact that you have resources already. You want to grow 10% over the year. So 10% increase would be $3.43 million. So now I have a plan of $3.43 million, and I have to lay out the plan. So I always suggest taking that $3.143 million and laying it out across the 12-month fiscal year. Now, that shouldn't be take 3.43 and divide it by 12, and every month is the same, because as most companies have, they have sort of the sine curve or the cosine curve or the bell curve or whatever, where there are just certain seasons or certain quarters where there is higher revenue earnings because there's more work coming in the door. And then there's the times of the year that you want to avoid, things like holiday season, or for us, the month of May is a challenge because we have 3 conferences that we're supporting, and some are vacations. So take that 3.43, but realistically distribute it across the 12 months in a way that can marry up with expectations of where you expect people to be out. December, probably a small month. Summer, maybe a little bit lower. Beginning of Q4, maybe that's really high, going forward for your plan. In any case, all of it should add up to 3.43. So then, of course, you've got a 10% growth, so the resources that you have enough to make 3.12. So how many resources do you need to get up to 3.43 if you just maintain the same utilization, the same bill rate? So you sort of have to figure out, when do I need to hire people, and then what's the lead time I need to hire people. So all of that sort of goes into your revenue plan. When do I expect to hire people? I may need people by Q2, so therefore I have to make sure I hire them at the end of Q1 and get them ramped up so that Q2 they can start hitting those numbers that I'm expecting, and therefore I can meet my goal at the end of the year. So now you have a plan. But then you have to establish the forecast of when you expect the work to come in and how are you doing against that plan. So I look at 3 different forecasting methods. I'm sure there's many out there, and would love to hear from other folks on this. But I look at 3 forecasting methods. One is the estimated method. I think of this as a top-down method. Everyone's got a feel for, well, I think this person can deliver this much this much revenue each month, or this department or this project can deliver this much revenue each month. So you sort of have a base knowledge of where the numbers are going to come in from, and this can literally be typed into a spreadsheet. Okay. The straight line option is where you're doing a little bit of a timeline analysis. You're thinking, okay, so I've got $1 million over 10 months. Okay, it's 100,000 every month. So you're just sort of spreading it across there like a peanut butter, and that's probably not realistic to how the project's being delivered, but it's a basic forecast. And then there's the resource-based approach, which is very much a bottom-up. This is where you get down into the gory details and, schedule Sally for this many hours at this bill rate, and she should be able to earn this much money. So it's a bottom-up, resource plan-driven metric. So each of these has pros and cons, and they can all be sort of used in combination with each other depending on the type of services that you deliver and your organization and where you need to be accurate in your forecast. The estimated, I think, is something that I think a lot of people, if you've run an organization for a long time, you can sort of fall back on this because you know the trends, sort of know where the earnings are going to come in from. It could be project level, so your PMs are comfortable enough to do this kind of thing at a project level. It could be a department manager doing it at a P&L level, just based on, sort of the sales are consistent, the bill rates are consistent, the utilization is consistent, so therefore we should be able to just throw numbers in a spreadsheet and that'll be our forecast. This one, you have to kind of continually watch this forecast method because you have to compare it against actual capacity and actual trends to see if you need to be adjusting what your estimate is. So you're sort of using historical information to adjust your forecast going forward, which is not a bad way. It's just it's a more mature forecast method, I think, because you have to rely on the fact that you already have trending data to be able to put these numbers down and feel comfortable with them. The straight line method, this is, I think, is the simplest method, and this is really just simply give me a start, give me a end, spread the budget across the way, and assume that the earnings are even between those two dates, which, as many of you know, unless even fixed fee percent complete doesn't necessarily trend in a nice, smooth manner. So I think this is a good basic forecasting. If you're not doing forecasting today, or you're trying to use the estimated, but you need something a little bit more computation based, I think straight line is a nice simple way. You could back into resource needs simply by knowing what your average bill rate is, taking your straight line forecast, and then doing the math to figure out how many headcounts or how many hours you need. So it does give you a little bit of sort of a resource need type view. I actually still like to use this even if you're in the next one, which is resource-based, the bottom-up approach. I like to use straight line for sort of that early project planning forecasting, so that you have an expectation that this project may happen during this time frame, and you don't have enough information to even staff it at the point, but you know it's going to be $1 million and it probably will take 10 months. You tend to start falling into patterns like that with your offerings, so therefore you should be able to do straight lines to at least put some monies in the forecast for comparison of how you're going to deliver. And then of course the resource-based one. This is the most in-depth one. This requires you to schedule the resources. I need this kind of person or this kind of skill set for this amount of time on these dates, this much effort, and of course then it does all the math to see based on billing rules or your revenue model. This is where a lot of PSAs can do this. PSA solutions are focused on resource-based forecasting because it gives you a way to sort of fall back on all of the math underneath the covers, and what really becomes important then is the accountability for resource scheduling, making sure that resource scheduling is accurate, because that also gives you the other additional benefit of saying, okay, here's my capacity versus demand based on skill sets. I need to hire some more of these types of people. So this is the most advanced and robust forecast method. It is higher to maintain though, because now you're having a few moving parts that you have to pay attention to, and the resource scheduling is really important. So if you come up with your plan, and then you're looking at like a forecast method or maybe a combination of forecast methods. So now you have to put it together. You take your plan and you do your forecast of your backlog and your pipeline. Backlog to me is signed contract work that has yet to be delivered. Pipeline is your sales pipeline that you have to define sort of where that line is drawn on. Do I include everything and just weight it? Do I include only probable wins from the sales team? Like what do I need to factor in to your forecast? But you take that forecast and then you lay them next to each other to determine the wedge. Okay, this is a term that a colleague of mine used often when we would talk about plan versus forecast, and it was the wedge. How do you deal with the wedge? The wedge is what's missing. That's the gap. If you have negative wedge, that's great. That means you're going faster than planned, and your concerns are more of trying to keep up with that fast pace probably. But for many of you, it may be the opposite. The wedge is the gap of I don't have enough monies forecasted for me to be able to hit plan. And so really the wedge, I think, is the thing to focus on when you're managing growth, because the wedge is where is the money coming from. And if you can focus on how to reduce the wedge or eliminate the wedge, then you're in a good position. So how do you eliminate the wedge? Now, the problem is there's not a single answer to this because the wedge relies on a lot of stuff. Just like, if you hit utilization but you miss revenue, why is that? Well, there's a lot of dependencies on calculations like that. So the things that I think about when I have to worry about factors that are needed to reduce the wedge. Well, first and foremost, do we have enough sales coming in the door, right? If we don't have enough sales to sustain the staff, it doesn't matter how much you jack up whatever the rate is or the effort that's on current projects, you're just not going to make it because there's not enough work coming in the door for the resources that you have. So that's a sort of a core thing. Everyone's probably already nodding their head saying, yes, of course, this is expected. We need to have sales in the door to make sure that we can even come close to hitting the revenue targets. Now the bill rate is the other thing. So your bill rate, that bill rate that you're setting for your plan, your target bill rate that you're looking for, you definitely need to keep an eye on that because that's where some of the, where you need to make that as tight, as efficient as you can and watch out for those fixed price projects, especially as the fixed price projects finish, go back and understand, could we have done something more effectively? Should we have estimated it different so that we maintain that bill rate at a high level? Increasing the bill rate year over year is sort of a quick fix to growing the company year over year, but you're not really growing the company, you're just growing the price. And the bill rate is something that can address the wedge, but it shouldn't be the final answer because really what you're trying to get is more productive hours out of your resources. So where can I decrease administration and increase the hours that people are spending on services delivery so that my overall spend of resources is as efficient as possible. My bill rate is a quick fix, but your utilization and getting your people delivering stuff efficiently is the higher priority. And of course, if they don't have any work to do, then of course the utilization is really not going to help too much. So it starts with sales. The bill rate is a quick fix, but it's not a long-term fix. Utilization is really where you need to focus and making sure that every hour is as productive as possible. Then of course, even if everyone's working as productively as they can with a great bill rate and the sales are all coming in, what's the missing factor? The missing factor is, well, everyone's doing exactly what they need to do, but I'm still not hitting my revenue numbers. And that's because I need to hire more people, and that's where you get both of the hours and the money component, because as you hire headcount in and you make them productive, then they get more hours in the door and they obviously earn more money. So that's where in the plan, as you lay out your forecast of resources and your capacity as you're in the plan, there's going to be certain months where you're forecasting that you're going to earn X dollars and you don't even have enough current capacity to deliver that. So you have to plan on hiring a billable headcount before that so that that person can be productive and bring that in. So the wedge is a really good metric to say where does the wedge start getting big, what do I need to do to sort of reduce that wedge, and it comes down to really resources again, and then that bill rate per money, that bill rate for the money component of it. So we'll open up the phone lines in just a second, and then we'll stop the recording. But just to summarize, the growth, you have to start with a plan in order to sort of measure your growth, right? Yes, you can measure growth year over year based on what number you end up at the end of the year, but really you have to have a plan because otherwise without a plan you don't really have a direction. You have to establish a forecasting method that works for your organization. And if you can get to the resource-based type metric, that's a great metric. It's a bottom-up metric, but it does require care and feeding. You have to make sure that people are accountable to getting those resource schedules in and accurate. You have to manage the wedge. So the wedge is that baseline plan versus your forecast and where is the rest of the money coming in from. And that's the trick. The wedge is where do I need to streamline my hours, make sure the hours are productive? Where do I need to make sure I have people in place to be able to attain the revenue as we're heading down the path of month after month revenue? So obviously you're looking at this information from a trending and a continual cadence perspective as you're managing the organization. And finally, making sure that your forecasting accuracy, people are accountable for that. whether it is based on the estimated and people are putting in sort of their, their gut feel or their knowledge of trends in the past, all the way to the scheduling of resources, making sure that's accurate. So the accountability of the forecasting piece is really important, because that is what's going to give you that wedge to be able to manage as an executive.